Hi there. Um, Today we're going to solve a little quadratic here by a process known as completing the square. Okay, it's very handy to know how to do this. Well, I don't know. Some people will say that it's handy to know. It works only in certain conditions. It works if you have an even number in front of your x, an even b value. It works really nicely if you don't have a leading coefficient. So if those two conditions are met, then completing the square is a really nice way to avoid having to do the quadratic formula. So here are the steps to completing the square. Step number 1, move your given number to the other side of your equation. Okay, we really just want to have a fresh, clean x squared and x together on one side. Okay, because what we want to do is we want to make a number. We want to find a number so that when we add it to here, when we add it to our x and our x squared, this becomes a perfect square trinomial. That is a trinomial that is factorable to x plus and minus something squared. Okay, so we want to come up with a number. And there is a number possible in here. And what we do to one side, we also have to do to the other. So let me come back over here. We also have to add it to this side to be mathematically correct and have a balanced equation. So I need to find a number that I can put in here that makes this a perfect factorable trinomial. Okay, and that number is a very special number. It's found by dividing your b value by 2 and squaring it. Okay, that is the number that goes in here. So here's your b value, -8. Half of -8 is -4, and -4 squared is 16. So 16 is what we're going to add to both sides, because 16 is half of -8 squared. Okay, so this one factors to x minus 4 and x minus 4. Those are the numbers that multiply to give you 16 and add to give -8. So that's our whole entire point, is to make a quadratic that does that. And over here on this side, -6 plus 16 is 10. So now I have this equation that I can now solve by, well, first I'm going to square root both sides. Okay, so all I'm doing is I'm really avoiding using the quadratic formula. Because notice we would have gotten this plus and minus the square root of 10 eventually with our quadratic formula. Okay, and our last step is to add 4 to both sides, and we don't ever add anything to radicals. So my final answer is going to look like +4 plus and minus the square root of 10. So once again, this is good because we don't have to, number one, remember the quadratic formula, nor do we have to reduce it. Okay, so this is what would happen once we reduced our quadratic formula. Okay, notice we'd have a -b. Okay, so there would have been an 8. Anyway, it's handy to know if you can meet the two criteria of this being an even number and this being a 1. Okay, completing the square. Hi there. Today we're going to solve this quadratic equation by a process known as completing the square. So completing the square works really well if we have a even number in front of x and we have a 1 in front of x squared. Okay, if those two things aren't met, if those criteria are something else, then completing the square might work, but it is more mathematically strenuous, and there are better ways to do it than that way. But here we are meeting the criteria, so let's do it by completing the square. So the first thing we do is we subtract our number to the other side of the equation so that I just have my variables on this side. Okay, and I am going to figure out a number that I can add to this quadratic to make it into a perfect square trinomial. Okay, and that number is negative is b divided by 2, so here's my b value, 4 divided by 2 squared. Okay, since we can pick any number we want to make the number one that is a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so we take half of the b value, half of this number, and we square it, and that gives us this thing over here. So now that I have that, this is a perfect square trinomial. So what I mean is it factors to two of the same binomials. Okay, in this case, x plus 2. X plus 2 squared. If I were to multiply out x plus 2, I would get this quadratic here that I started with. Okay, and this is exactly what we want. That's what makes this a perfect square. Thus, the term completing the square. And on the right side, I have negative 7 plus 4, which is negative 3. So now I can solve this. I have a square, so I can solve by square rooting. So I square root both sides. There's no more parentheses. I just have an x plus 2. And on this side, I have plus and minus the square root of negative 3. So hopefully you've already talked about this in your class. And we know that when we square root a negative, we get an imaginary number. So my last step is subtracting 2, and you never subtract or add anything to a radical. So the negative 2 goes in front, and I still have my plus and minus. The negative square root will come out as an I, and because 3 is not perfect, it stays underneath the radical. So this is my complete answer. X is negative 2 plus and minus I times the square root of 3. Okay, thanks for watching this completing the square video. Hopefully it has helped you a little bit.